On July 22, 2011, a white transporter van is seen driving through the back roads of central Norway, the capital of Oslo. In the driver's seat is a man dressed in a fake police uniform. It was the then 32-year-old Anders Behring Breivik, a far-right extremist and soon to be terrorist. In the back of the van is a bomb that is only minutes away from exploding. Breivik's aim is to harm the Norwegian Labour Party as much as possible, as they were opposing his ideology. The ideology of a Norway free from immigrants and multiculturalism. Unconcerned that the bomb could go off any second, Breivik drives the car calmly through the narrow streets and parks the car in front of the government building housing the Labour Party's minister's office. He gets out of the van and leaves the area barefoot as captured by CCTV cameras. Breivik makes his way to another car he parked nearby and fled from the scene just moments before. Chaos, panic, destruction. Witnesses described the scene like that of a war country. Glass and pieces of concrete litter the streets as injured and deadly wounded people are lying around. The only thing breaking the silence are alarms and people shouting for help. The police evacuate the inner city and suspect a gas leak explosion at first. 8 people would die as a consequence of the bomb blast. The bomb was just the beginning for Breivik. His next attack turned out to have an even deadlier outcome as he targeted the summer camp for the youth of the Norwegian Labour Party on the island of Utøya, which is a yearly summer camp, and this year 600 teenagers spent the summer there. He also tried to be there in time to kill former minister Gro Harlem Brundtland, who held a speech on the island just hours before Breivik's arrival. She is a former leader of the Norwegian Labour Party and his main target. But Breivik took 1 hour and 30 minutes to drive to the island instead of the usual 45 minutes, as many people tried to flee from the scene of the bomb blast in the center of Oslo and getting Breivik stuck in traffic. In the meantime, on the island of Utøya, the teens received news of an explosion in Oslo and grew worried about relatives living or working there. As soon later news breaks of the explosion not being an accident but may have been caused by terrorists, parents also grew worried for their children. But the teens reassured their parents, "We are on a small island in the middle of nowhere. It is the safest place in Norway right now." Safest couldn't have been more wrong, as just minutes after those words were spoken, Breivik arrives at the ferry station. Measures have already been implemented after the explosion to assure the safety of everyone on Utøya, and so the ferry, the MS Thorbjørn, only ran as needed instead of every full hour. Breivik, still dressed as a fake police officer, had it easy to convince the ferry captain to let him board the boat. As Breivik stated, "I was sent from the Oslo Police Department to secure the safety of everyone on the island." And so, he boarded the MS Thorbjørn as the weather worsened. After arriving, he is greeted by Monica Bosse by the main house of the island, and she was immediately suspicious of the strange man in a police uniform, and so she calls the security guard Trond Bernsten to her. As soon as the two turned their back towards Breivik, he shot them both. After killing the 2 adults, he shoots a person on the way to the island cafe, and there he gathers a few teenagers who didn't know what just happened moments before, and Breivik starts shooting them. He enters the island cafe next, where 13 teenagers would be shot. There are to this day marks on the wall on the island cafe showing signs of the tragedy that occurred. Some teenagers who were inside their tents mistook the shots as fireworks or as a prank, and went outside to look, and they got shot as Breivik exited the building. At this point, most of the 600 people realized that there was a shooter on the island, and with no hope that help will arrive quickly, they looked for places to hide, and were soon to realize that those places were scarce. Meanwhile, emergency services were notified, but due to some complications, their arrival on the island was delayed, and Breivik was just getting started. He shot more people fleeing towards the shore, where most children were hiding. Some of them tried to swim to the mainland to escape the terror, but those were very visible to the shooter, and Breivik still tried to shoot them from the island. Other ones who chose to stay hidden behind rocks were also shot by him. He continues on the shore looking for people hiding, and he finds them. Many of them. Sadly, the emergency and medical services still were nowhere near the island. It even came to a point where Breivik himself called the police to surrender.
Ja, god dagen. Her kommandør Anders Behring Breivik i den norske antikommunistiske motstandsbevegelsen. Jeg er på Utøya for øyeblikket. Jeg ønsker å overgi meg. Ok. Hvilket nummer ringer du fra? Jeg ringer fra mobil. Du ringer fra din mobil? Ja. Det er ikke min mobil, en annen. Ja, hva heter du for noe?
But at this point, he was still far away from being arrested. He went on to shoot in a school building where around 50 people barricaded themselves in and fired a few shots aimlessly through the walls without harming anyone. He moves on to the northern shore where many people were hiding. News helicopters flying over the area filmed Breivik during the massacre. He continues on the shore while the police arrive on the mainland. Not really prepared for the situation, the special unit of the police board a dinghy way too small for the crew, and when the motor fails, the boat almost sinks. But before that would happen, they boarded a civilian boat and continued away to the island where they quickly stumble upon Breivik. Breivik surrendered and took down his weapon almost immediately and walked calmly towards the force. Breivik's attack was over at 6:40 and left 69 people on the island dead and many more injured, also counting one fatality who drowned and one who fell on the slippery stones while running away. The special force brought Breivik into the main building on the island. He sat there reactionless, as if the last hour and 20 minutes didn't happen, and complained about a cut on his hand. To the police, the behavior was surreal, as they stumbled onto an overwhelming number of bodies on the island. They said there was just bodies after bodies. It just wouldn't stop. Breivik was brought off the island and emergency services and police were now able to assess the situation. Wounded and shocked teens were taken care of by doctors, while the police scanned the island for survivors. Some of the teenagers needed a lot of time to be convinced that the real police were now in front of them. 47 survivors were found inside the island school and also 23 inside some caves on the shore. Another 150 people got fished out of the water by local heroes while the teens tried to swim away from the island. After every person was accounted for, criticism against the police was getting louder. It came out that the police had to take cars to Utøya instead of a helicopter, because all the pilots were on holiday at the same time. The incident with the boat was seen as unfortunate rather than a mistake by the police. On the island itself, they committed a huge mistake though. When they first arrived on the island, they arrested a 17-year-old teen. The boy was of Muslim descent and the police was expecting an ISIS terrorist to be behind the attack. But it turned out to be a horrible mistake as the teen was a member of the summer camp and was arrested and interrogated before being released after 17 hours. The parents of the boy were not notified, and as the boy's name was not on the list for survivors that was handed out to parents, they were expecting the worst. Luckily in the case of this boy, it all ended well, but Breivik destroyed many lives that day. All for a plan he thought would help his ideology and start a war in Europe against Muslims and integration. This attack was planned months before the execution, and Breivik used a farm he had north of Oslo to order a large number of artificial fertilizer and other chemicals to produce explosives with. Breivik also sent out his 150,000-page manifesto to 1,000 politicians and journalists explaining his ideals and reasoning for the attack. As you may have imagined, the court didn't think of Anders Breivik as a sane person and diagnosed a severe psychosis. Later, the insanity ruling got overturned and so he could be ruled guilty for his crimes and receive 21 years in prison, which is the maximum sentence in Norway.